Hollywood never forgets its blockbusters, but it conveniently buries its failures. The 1,970 seconds gave us cultural earthquakes like Jaws and Star Wars, but behind those shining towers stood a row of films labeled disasters. Critics scoffed, audiences stayed away, and studios bled money. Yet decades later, those very misfires are celebrated as some of the boldest, most visionary works of the decade. So, what happened? And why do these so-called failures now feel more important than the hits? Sorcerer 1977. This film nearly drowned its director, and yet audiences barely noticed it. William Friedkin was on fire in the early 70 seconds. The French Connection won him Oscars. The Exorcist scared the world stiff. So when he set his sights on Sorcerer, a remake of the French classic The Wages of Fear, studios gave him the green light. What they got was one of the most punishing shoots in film history. Friedkin didn't want sound stages or fake rain. He wanted authenticity. That meant dragging his cast and crew deep into the jungles of the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, and Mexico. Trucks were hauled across unstable bridges. Cast members battled illness, exhaustion, and near breakdowns. One bridge scene took months to film as crews rebuilt it again and again after storms destroyed it. By the time production wrapped, costs had exploded, and the studio's nerves were shot. The movie opened in 1977, but it never stood a chance. Just 2 weeks earlier, Star Wars hit theaters and changed everything. Audiences wanted space battles, not sweaty men inching trucks across collapsing planks. Sorcerer sank instantly, dismissed as overlong and humorless. But over time, people went back. They saw what Friedkin had done, a brutal, uncompromising meditation on desperation, chance, and survival. Roy Scheider leads a cast of haunted men who risk everything for one dangerous job. The tension is unbearable, the cinematography stunning, and the set pieces unmatched. That bridge crossing, with trucks teetering above raging waters, still makes palms sweat decades later. Once branded a flop, Sorcerer is now regarded as a masterpiece that simply arrived too soon, eclipsed by the shadow of George Lucas's galaxy far, far away. Barry Lyndon 1975. Stanley Kubrick turned candles into cameras and almost ruined MGM in the process. After the shocking energy of A Clockwork Orange, fans expected Kubrick's next project to push boundaries again. What he delivered was Barry Lyndon, a stately 3-hour epic about a scheming Irishman clawing his way into the upper crust of 18th century Europe. It wasn't fast, it wasn't violent, it was painterly and deliberate, more art gallery than movie theater. Kubrick's obsession with detail bordered on madness. He refused to use artificial lighting and interior shots. Instead, he had special lenses developed by NASA to capture scenes using only candlelight. Costumes were stitched with period-accurate fabrics. Locations were chosen for historical authenticity, not convenience. Every frame looked like a classical painting come alive, but the process was grueling and the budget soared. When it opened in 1975, audiences yawned. Many critics complained the film was slow, detached, and emotionally cold. Viewers raised on The Godfather and Jaws weren't eager to sit through 3 hours of aristocrats arguing by candlelight. MGM had hoped for a blockbuster to revive its finances, but instead got a financial disappointment that slipped quietly out of theaters. Yet, decades later, Barry Lyndon rose from the ashes. Directors like Martin Scorsese, Sofia Coppola, and Ridley Scott cite it as a major influence. Its natural lighting changed the way filmmakers thought about cinematography, and its exploration of greed, vanity, and downfall feels timeless. Ryan O'Neal's wooden performance, once mocked, now reads as perfect for a man consumed by status, yet hollow inside. Today, Barry Lyndon sits near the top of Kubrick's legacy. It may have flopped in its day, but time revealed it as one of the most visually stunning achievements in cinema history. The Man Who Fell to Earth 1976. When David Bowie played an alien, people weren't sure if it was acting or just Bowie being himself. Nicholas Roeg's The Man Who Fell to Earth wasn't a typical sci-fi spectacle. Instead of spaceships and laser beams, it gave audiences a lonely alien arriving on Earth in search of water for his dying planet. Bowie, in his first major film role, embodied Thomas Newton with an uncanny mix of fragility, charisma, and strangeness. Roeg pushed storytelling boundaries. The editing was fractured, jumping back and forth through time. The visuals were surreal, often dreamlike. Themes of addiction, greed, and isolation simmered beneath the surface. Critics didn't know what to do with it. Some praised its artistry, but many dismissed it as incoherent, overly long, and confusing. Audiences, expecting something easier to digest, walked out. At the box office, it was a disaster. Yet, like Bowie's own music, the film didn't fade. It grew. With time, The Man Who Fell to Earth became a cult classic. Bowie's performance is now iconic, often cited as one of the most perfectly cast roles in cinema history. Who else could embody an outsider, at once magnetic and alien, so convincingly? The film's deeper themes have also aged well. It's a story about what happens when innocence collides with corporate greed, when hope crashes into human corruption. The alien comes to save his world, but instead gets trapped by ours. Once dismissed as pretentious, the movie now feels like a haunting prophecy about capitalism, addiction, and loneliness. It bombed hard in 1976, but today, The Man Who Fell to Earth is hailed as a visionary experiment that dared to break the mold. Phantom of the Paradise, 1974. Part rock opera, part horror, part satire, Phantom of the Paradise was too weird to live in 1974. Directed by Brian De Palma, the film fused The Phantom of the Opera with glam rock, Faust, and a dash of Frankenstein. The story follows a composer tricked by a ruthless record producer who then haunts a glittery concert hall while watching his music twisted into soulless hits. It was loud, campy, and drenched in neon. Paul Williams wrote the songs and played the villainous producer Swan, turning in a performance that was equal parts sleazy and magnetic. Costumes looked like they belonged to a futuristic masquerade ball, and the humor veered into sharp satire about the commercialization of music. Audiences in 1974 didn't know what to make of it. Released the same year as Blazing Saddles, The Godfather Part 2, and The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Phantom didn't fit into any category. Critics dismissed it as shallow spectacle, and the box office returns were pitiful. It looked like an embarrassing misstep for De Palma, who was still finding his footing as a director. But a funny thing happened. In Winnipeg, Canada, the movie exploded in popularity, running for years in theaters and gaining an obsessive fan base. From that unlikely city, the cult spread worldwide. Fans embraced its wild mashup of satire, tragedy, and glam spectacle. Today, Phantom of the Paradise is celebrated as one of the boldest and most original musicals ever made. It predicted the rise of corporate-controlled pop stardom long before MTV, and its soundtrack remains a favorite among cult cinema lovers. What once looked like a disaster is now recognized as a rock opera masterpiece that was simply too far ahead of its time. Days of Heaven, 1978. A movie so beautiful it looks like it was painted by nature itself, yet audiences walked away. After the lyrical success of Badlands, Terrence Malick returned with Days of Heaven, a simple love triangle set against the wheat fields of the Texas Panhandle at the turn of the century. Richard Gere, Brooke Adams, and Sam Shepard star in a story of love, betrayal, and survival. But the real star is the camera. Cinematographer Nestor Almendros, along with Haskell Wexler, captured sweeping landscapes bathed in golden light. Malick insisted on filming during magic hour, those fleeting moments at dusk and dawn when the world glows with soft fire. The result was imagery so gorgeous it could stop your breath. Every frame looked like a painting. Yet, when it premiered in 1978, critics and audiences didn't know what to do with it. The story felt sparse. Dialogue was minimal. The pacing was slow, more like a poem than a plot-driven film. Box office returns were weak, and the film was seen as another art house curiosity destined for obscurity. But time reshaped its reputation. Almendros won an Academy Award for his cinematography, and the film is now considered one of the greatest visual achievements in American cinema. Directors from Terrence Davies to Christopher Nolan cite its influence. Its meditative style, once a liability, is now celebrated for its lyricism. Today, Days of Heaven is treasured as a landmark of visual storytelling. It bombed commercially, but its legacy proves that sometimes the quietest films echo the loudest across time. New York, 1977. Martin Scorsese made a musical, and audiences left humming disappointment. After Taxi Driver turned him into Hollywood's new genius, Scorsese stunned everyone by choosing a glossy MGM-style musical as his next project. New York, paired Robert De Niro, playing an egotistical jazz saxophonist, with Liza Minnelli, a powerhouse singer who pours her heart into every note. The idea was to revive the Golden Age musical while mixing in Scorsese's gritty realism. The result? A sprawling 3-hour epic that baffled viewers. Instead of charm and sparkle, audiences got screaming arguments, abusive relationships, and moody improvisation. De Niro stayed in character even off-camera, clashing constantly with Minnelli. The film's budget ballooned, the editing dragged, and by the time it premiered, critics were ready with knives. It lost money fast and nearly wrecked Scorsese's career. But here's the twist. The music lived on. Minnelli's performance of the title song, New York, New York, became a standard. When Frank Sinatra recorded his version in 1980, the film's biggest failure turned into an anthem for an entire city. Today, the movie itself has been reappraised. It's messy, yes, but it's also daring. Scorsese deliberately mashed together the artificial gloss of Hollywood musicals with the raw pain of modern relationships. It's not an easy watch, but it's a fascinating one. What audiences once rejected now feels like a fearless experiment by a director refusing to play safe. Winter Kills 1979. A film about conspiracy got buried by one. Winter Kills, directed by William Richard, was based on a novel loosely inspired by the Kennedy assassination. Starring Jeff Bridges as the half-brother of a slain president, the film follows him through a labyrinth of cover-ups, shady operatives, and deep state machinations. The cast was stacked. John Huston, Anthony Perkins, and Eli Wallach all appeared. On paper, it looked like a prestige thriller ready to strike gold. Instead, chaos reigned behind the scenes. Financing came from questionable sources, and production was plagued by shutdowns. Rumors swirled that backers with ties to organized crime didn't want the film finished. When it finally limped into release in 1979, distributors barely touched it. Critics were intrigued but confused, audiences ignored it, and the box office returns were pitiful. Yet beneath the mess was brilliance. Richard's direction balanced satire with paranoia, turning the film into a surreal, darkly comic take on America's obsession with power and secrecy. Jeff Bridges gave one of his sharpest young performances, and Huston relished his role as a ruthless patriarch. Over time, Winter Kills built a cult reputation. Cinephiles discovered its biting wit and chilling relevance. Today, it's praised as one of the sharpest political films of the 1970 seconds, eerily prescient about how truth gets buried under money and influence. What once looked like a doomed disaster now stands as a daring piece of cinema that refused to play it safe. The Friends of Eddie Coyle, 1973. Robert Mitchum delivered one of his greatest performances, and hardly anyone noticed. In The Friends of Eddie Coyle, Mitchum plays a weary small-time hustler trying to survive in the grim underbelly of Boston. Based on George V. Higgins's gritty novel, the film stripped away glamour and showed crime as a dead-end grind of paranoia and betrayal. The problem was timing. Audiences in 1973 were embracing the flashier thrills of The Godfather and Dirty Harry. Compared to those, Eddie Coyle felt too quiet, too bleak. Critics admired Mitchum's subdued, haunting performance, but the box office barely registered a pulse. The film vanished quickly, overshadowed by bigger crime dramas. But years later, cinephiles rediscovered it. Mitchum, usually larger than life, plays Eddie as a man utterly worn down, a tragic figure drowning in the weight of bad choices. Director Peter Yates shot Boston in a raw, documentary-like style, capturing diners, parking lots, and backrooms that felt painfully real. There are no heroic shootouts, no glamorous paydays, just exhaustion, desperation, and betrayal. Today, The Friends of Eddie Coyle is praised as one of the most authentic crime films ever made. Quentin Tarantino has cited it as a favorite, and modern audiences appreciate its honesty about the small-time world of crooks who never win. What bombed in 1973 is now regarded as one of Mitchum's finest swan songs. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, 1973. Sam Peckinpah delivered a Western elegy, and the studio butchered it. By 1973, Peckinpah was already notorious for battles with Hollywood. His revisionist Western, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, starred James Coburn and Chris Christopherson as aging lawman and outlaw, circling each other in a doomed dance of loyalty and betrayal. It should have been a classic. Instead, MGM panicked. Peckinpah's cut ran long, filled with quiet scenes of reflection and melancholy. The studio hacked nearly 20 minutes out, releasing a chopped-up version that critics slammed as incoherent. The box office was weak, and Peckinpah's reputation sank further into the mud. But the film had something the studio couldn't kill: Bob Dylan. Not only did Dylan act in the film, he wrote its legendary soundtrack, including the ballad "Knockin' on Heaven's Door." That song outlived the movie, becoming an anthem covered by countless artists. Decades later, Peckinpah's original cut was restored, and suddenly critics saw the masterpiece buried beneath the studio's meddling. It's a mournful, elegiac western about the death of an era, filled with haunting performances and lyrical pacing. Today, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid is celebrated as one of Peckinpah's most personal works. It flopped when it mattered, but time revealed the poetry hiding in its dust. Performance 1971. When Mick Jagger made a gangster movie, it turned into a psychedelic trip too strange for its own good. Co-directed by Donald Cammell and Nicholas Roeg, Performance tells the story of a violent London gangster on the run who hides out with a reclusive rock star. What starts as a crime film morphs into a kaleidoscopic identity crisis, blurring the lines between reality, fantasy, and madness. Warner Brothers was horrified when they saw the finished cut. Expecting a stylish gangster drama, they got hallucinatory editing, surreal imagery, and themes of identity collapse. The studio delayed release for nearly 2 years, chopping at the film in hopes of making it palatable. When it finally hit U.S. theaters in 1971, critics were vicious. Audiences expecting a straightforward gangster flick walked out dazed and angry. It was a bomb of the highest order. But as years passed, Performance built a cult. Jagger's presence gave it rock mythology, while James Fox's unsettling performance as the gangster added a layer of darkness. The film's exploration of identity and transformation has since been praised as daring and ahead of its time. Directors from David Lynch to Guy Ritchie have cited its influence. What was once dismissed as incoherent now feels like one of the boldest experiments of British cinema. Performance failed spectacularly in its day, but in hindsight, it was simply too strange, too daring, and too brilliant to be appreciated by 1971 audiences. The Devils. 1971. No film in the 1970 seconds rattled nerves quite like The Devils. Directed by Ken Russell, it told the story of religious hysteria, political corruption, and mass persecution in 17th-century France. Oliver Reed played a charismatic priest, and Vanessa Redgrave, a disturbed nun whose obsession spiraled into chaos. Russell drenched the film in striking visuals, white brick sets, operatic performances, and imagery designed to shock audiences. And shock them, it did. The British Board of Film Classification slashed the film to pieces. Censors worldwide refused to screen it. Warner Brothers panicked, burying it in heavily edited form. Critics were scandalized, calling it grotesque, lurid, and unwatchable. The box office response was disastrous. For decades, The Devils remained nearly impossible to see in its complete version, locked away like a dangerous secret. But for those who managed to catch it, the brilliance was undeniable. Beneath the controversy lay a fierce political allegory about power, fear, and manipulation. Russell wasn't making shock for shock's sake. He was exposing how hysteria and authority can twist truth into destruction. His bold visual style, once condemned, is now celebrated for its audacity. Today, The Devils is viewed as one of the most important and daring films of the decade. What was once branded obscene is now recognized as fearless cinema that refused to play safe. It flopped hard in 1971, but its legacy is louder than ever. McCabe and Mrs. Miller 1971. Robert Altman made a Western without heroes, and audiences didn't know how to handle it. Starring Warren Beatty and Julie Christie, McCabe and Mrs. Miller follows a gambler and a brothel madam who set up shop in a dreary frontier town only to clash with ruthless corporate interests. Unlike traditional westerns filled with noble cowboys and gunslinging showdowns, Altman gave viewers something murkier, slower, and more melancholy. The film was visually striking, shot in misty British Columbia landscapes with Leonard Cohen's mournful songs threading through the story. But its loose dialogue, overlapping conversations, and meandering pace confused viewers in 1971. Critics were divided, some praising its originality, others dismissing it as sloppy. At the box office, it was a disappointment, fading quickly against flashier releases. Yet, over the years, McCabe and Mrs. Miller has been reappraised as a masterpiece. Altman reinvented the Western, stripping away myths and showing the frontier as cold, muddy, and brutal. Beatty's swaggering McCabe, ultimately revealed as insecure and doomed, and Christie's sharp Mrs. Miller, trapped by addiction, turned genre archetypes on their heads. Today, it's regarded as one of the finest revisionist Westerns ever made. What once looked like a dreary misfire now shines as a daring subversion of Hollywood tradition. The Long Goodbye, 1973. Raymond Chandler's tough detective Philip Marlowe had always been sharp, suave, and street smart until Robert Altman threw him into 1970 Seconds, Los Angeles, and turned the legend inside out. In The Long Goodbye, Elliot Gould plays Marlowe not as the cool gumshoe fans expected, but as a shambling, chain-smoking drifter who mumbles his way through a city that no longer has a place for him. Altman stripped away the classic noir style and dropped Marlowe into a California filled with mobsters, crooked cops, yoga cults, and beachside paranoia. The result felt nothing like the detective stories people knew. Instead of a stylish thriller, it played like a melancholy satire about a man out of time. Audiences were baffled. Critics complained that Altman was mocking Chandler's legacy. Fans of traditional noir were furious, calling Gould's performance sloppy and unheroic. At the box office, it tanked, too strange for mainstream crowds and too commercial for the art house set. But Altman's vision aged like fine wine. What seemed messy in 1973 now looks daring. Gould's Marlowe, once mocked, feels like a perfect metaphor for the decade, a man clinging to outdated honor codes while surrounded by corruption and cynicism. Altman's loose camera work, overlapping dialogue, and dreamlike pacing, once called sloppy, are now praised as groundbreaking. The Long Goodbye also delivered one of cinema's most haunting final moments, where Marlowe is forced to betray his own ideals in a shocking act that shattered noir traditions. Once labeled a betrayal, it is now seen as a bold commentary on the death of old-fashioned morality. Rejected on release, The Long Goodbye has since become a cornerstone of 1970 Seconds. American cinema, proof that even a legendary detective can be reinvented for a darker, stranger era. The Passenger, 1975. Michelangelo Antonioni and Jack Nicholson joined forces for a masterpiece, yet audiences turned away. On the surface, The Passenger promised intrigue. A weary journalist, played by Nicholson, seizes the chance to escape his stale life by assuming the identity of a dead man. Instead of freedom, he finds himself tangled in danger, conspiracies, and questions of who he really island most expected a sharp thriller. What Antonioni delivered was something far more daring, a hypnotic meditation on alienation, identity, and the longing to disappear. The pacing was deliberately slow, dialogue was spare. The camera lingered on empty rooms, barren landscapes, and Nicholson's haunted expressions. For fans who wanted the fiery energy of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, this quiet, introspective performance felt like a letdown. Critics called it dull, pretentious, even lifeless. The film slipped out of theaters with little notice. But artistry has a way of resurfacing. In the decades since, The Passenger has been reappraised as one of Antonioni's greatest achievements. Its now legendary penultimate shot, a nearly 7-minute tracking sequence that drifts seamlessly through a barred window and across a dusty courtyard, became a landmark of cinematic technique studied by filmmakers worldwide. Nicholson himself often described the role as one of his proudest performances, precisely because it broke his usual mold. What once bored audiences is now celebrated as visionary. The Passenger stands as a haunting reflection on the futility of escape, the fragility of identity, and the way silence can speak louder than words. A box office failure in 1975, it has since been embraced as one of the decade's most quietly powerful films, Wise Blood 1979. John Huston closed the decade with a film too strange for mainstream audiences, yet unforgettable in hindsight. Adapted from Flannery O'Connor's novel, Wise Blood tells the story of Hazel Motes, a disillusioned veteran drifting through a bleak southern town. Determined to reject tradition, he launches his own street corner movement, insisting that his church without Christ will free people from lies. Brad Dourif, in one of the most electric performances of the 70 Seconds, plays Hazel with manic energy, eyes darting, voice trembling, body constantly on edge. Around him swirl eccentric characters, conmen, fanatics, hustlers, and wanderers, each stranger than the last. Huston stages the story as a bizarre comedy, but one that quickly turns unsettling. It's funny in moments, but never comfortable, always pulling the audience into deeper unease. Released in 1979, Wise Blood puzzled critics and baffled audiences. Huston's mix of satire, grotesque humor, and philosophical weight didn't fit neatly into any category. The film received only a limited release, box office numbers were weak, and reviewers wrote it off as a director past his prime. Yet time changed everything. O'Connor's darkly comic vision shines through in Huston's adaptation, and modern viewers recognize how faithful and fearless it really was. Dourif's performance, once overlooked, is now considered a career-defining achievement, a portrayal of obsession and despair that sticks long after the credits roll. What was dismissed in 1979 as too strange is now hailed as one of Huston's boldest late works, an unflinching portrait of belief, doubt, and the absurd ways humans search for meaning. So, there you have it. 15 films the box office buried, but history revived. In the 70 seconds, they were mocked, ignored, or cut to pieces. Today, they stand as daring experiments that pushed cinema forward. Which of these forgotten gems do you think deserves the most love? Let us know in the comments, hit subscribe, and never count out a so-called flop.